Today on Inside the Professor's Study, I talk with Dr. Bill Frazier, Professor of Geology and Chair of the Department of Earth and Space Sciences. Bill earned his Bachelor of Science degree at Furman University and a PhD in sedimentary petrology at the University of North Carolina. At the beginning of our conversation, we talk about what this region has to offer budding geologists. Today in Inside the Professor's Study, we have Dr. Bill Frazier. He's Professor of Geology and has been at Columbus State since 1974, which makes him one of the senior faculty. I understand with Barbara Hunt and Bill Edwards, maybe yes. You're holding the Triple Crown at this point?
Yes. Yep.
So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I thought I might start by asking some questions about geology.
Sure.
Because it's a subject that I'm curious about, but also have very little knowledge of. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about why the area in this region is geologically interesting. What makes it special in any way?
Oh, it's very special, actually. It turns out that we live on the so-called fault line. Mm-hmm. Which is the boundary between the Piedmont to the north and the coastal plain to the south. Mm-hmm. And they're very, very different kinds of rocks. They have very, very different histories and very, very different ages. The particular brand of geology that I study involves the coastal plain, so that's what I know the most about. But, like you say, I've been here a long time, so I had a chance to catch up on a lot of these areas. Mm-hmm. The Piedmont rocks, their history, much older, and it's part of the history of the Appalachian mountain chain in general. I mean, obviously they're not mountains now, but at one time they were part of this long, long chain of mountains that goes back into distant geological past. And this area at one time was probably alpine-like, big mountains.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
The coastal plain is basically formed from the detritus worn off those old mountains. So the sandstones through here, the limestones, the shales, and things like that, they formed mostly in shallow continental seas, or I should say shelf seas, like continental shelf seas. And there's evidence of that all around. You can find all kinds of marine fossils, shark's teeth, people collect here. A lot of folks who don't know much about geology have been collecting shark's teeth right here for a long time. Dr. Schwimmer has made a career out of studying some of the marine organisms, marine reptiles. He wrote a book on a 60-foot long crocodile called Deinosuchus. Mm-hmm. And some of the sediments are from river plains flowing down to the sea. Mm-hmm.
So was the sea then, like when you're talking about the continental shelf?
Yeah.
Would the water line have been further inland than
Yes.
we tend to think of it now?
Yes, very much so.
And then mountains kind of dramatically up?
Further north, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Actually, it's, how should I put this? Everyone's talking about global warming.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't really know how long the trends last and what would happen and so forth. But should all of the ice on Greenland, and particularly Antarctica, if that all melted, sea level would be up through here. This would be a coastal city. The sediments you see, for example, around Fort Benning, mm-hmm. formed in barrier island environments, very much like the Georgia coast today, Jekyll and all those.
Yeah.
You see evidence of tidal flats, estuaries, big sand shoals that formed in those estuaries. Mm-hmm. And again, organisms that live there, fish and reptiles and turtles, big turtles. It was simply because sea level was much higher then. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's because during this particular period of geological time, the Cretaceous, there was virtually no major continental glaciers anywhere. The Appalachians, though, they go back far longer. The peak of the Appalachian Mountains history came along, I'll say about 250 million years ago. They've been essentially eroding away ever since. The Cretaceous rocks of the coastal plain right here are the order of 80, 85 million. Further south you go, the younger they get. And the truth is, the coastal plain today is continuous with the coast. The same kind of environments you see, for example, at Panama City and the Florida coast, they were here back in the Cretaceous. Sea level goes up, sea level goes down.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Gosh, it is fascinating. It sounds like the exciting stuff you'd have to dig for, I guess. Is there anything we could, like, ordinary people just sort of, you know, making our way around the region,
Well, yeah.
are there things we could see with our naked eye that
Oh, yeah,
we wouldn't,
absolutely.
what would be of interest?
Well, natural exposures you find along creek banks where rivers and creeks have cut it into the sediments. If you take a boat ride down the Chattahoochee,
Yeah.
you'll see large bluffs. Those are places where these rocks are exposed. And there are also places where you collect these various fossils and things. But anything that cuts into the surface, for example, road cuts are well known in geology as being a prime place to go and look. Railroad cuts, same sort of thing. Construction sites. For example, you can't see this now because it's been grassed over, but out there in Whittlesey Park area, the Sam's Club store and the Kmart, directly behind them is a very large bank. And when they first cut it, you could see very well exposed essentially the line where these younger coastal plain sediments sit directly on top of the older Piedmont rocks. This so-called contact was exposed right there. And you could see details of this ancient soil. Sometimes soil profiles get preserved, and in this particular case it was. When I take my students out, we often go down to Fort Benning, mainly because it's not so well developed.
Right.
And there's more to see there. But yeah, in fact, a lot of the work I've done is basically looking at these exposures.
Yeah.
There's a really neat exposure over just south of Montgomery, Alabama, a place called Catawba Falls. And there's a real hard rocky ledge, and that rocky ledge is basically a limestone. But it's filled with little tiny sea urchins. And they're beautifully preserved.
Wow.
Yeah, it's neat.
Wow, that is really cool. Well, so I read about a project you were involved with in Russell County of sort of recovering, you'll have to help me out, paleontological artifacts before they did a subdivision over it or something?
They have not developed it yet. They're planning on it.
Okay.
But most rock units are named from places where they were first described or they were well exposed. On the coastal plain, in the Cretaceous age rocks, there's 5 or 6 of these so-called formations. They all have names. And one of the things you do when you're mapping is to find places where the contact between one formation and the one above it is exposed. Well, it turns out that overall, just off Highway 280, this big water tower up on the hill, and below it there's a very large area that has been scraped off, been eroded away, so you can see the rocks better. And there's a contact there. And I've been taking students out to see that for years. Well, there's one particular layer of very dense clay that runs through it. Mostly it's sand. And if you pick around in that clay a little bit, you're going to find plant fossils, find plant leaves preserved and things like that. So I guess it's been 6 or 7 years ago now. One of our seniors, for his senior thesis work, was going to map that contact. So I was out in the field with him. We went to a number of places where he could see it, and he was going to go and look for it himself. We went to this outcrop, and while we were picking through it, he found some really pretty leaves. He was fascinated by that. So one of our other geology majors was a friend of his. Went back the next day. That was on a Saturday. He went back Sunday.
Yeah.
And picking through it, they found an almost perfectly preserved feather, which is actually a big deal. So we all went out. Dr. Schwimmer went out with me and him and some of the students. Sean Patrick was the young man's name. Sean was got a position at Auburn. In fact, his friend also got a position at Auburn. And they chose to do their master's thesis on those rocks.
Wow.
So their professor got in touch with some of his friends, and all of a sudden we have a lot of folks from around the country. We had some scientists from Philadelphia, from Natural Museum of Natural History in New York. There was all of a sudden it became the focus of a lot of interest because this is really rare. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And they found, in addition to those fossils, they found very tiny, very tiny coarse sand-sized pieces of amber, some of which actually had fossils in them. So.
Well, that really answers what's interesting about our particular region. Sounds like a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And so, and when you go out to look at these contact spaces, do you have special tools? I mean, what, you know? I'm picturing how can you see them and be gentle enough not to destroy them, you know?
In terms of special tools, not really. My tool of choice, ever since I've been doing this, is these old folding army entrenching tools, an E-tool, and rock hammer, of course, and hand lens. I've always got a hand lens on me. I get it right now. Because a lot of what I do in the field is describing and mapping.
Okay.
I'll spend a lot of time just taking up samples of sand or whatever, studying them, look for whatever I can see in a hand lens. Scrape, often the outcrops, the exposures, called outcrops. Often they are sort of dirty. They have stuff over them, so you scrape that surface layer off so you can see the rocks better. And collect. Then you go back to the lab. In the lab, of course, there are a variety of implements. One of the things you do is to describe the size of the sediment, which you do by sieving it. We have a series of standard brass screens, brass sieves. You stack them up, of course, on the top, find the bottom, and then there's a shaker that shakes them for about 10 minutes. You end up splitting the sample up into various subsets, which you weigh, and then you use statistics. There's a couple of published statistical packages to run those data through, and that gives you a description of the grain size characteristics. That turns out to be important because in many cases you can distinguish the kind of circumstance the sediments were deposited in. Beach versus sand dunes versus rivers and so forth. Sometimes you can distinguish those different things just by grain size analysis. But also, under the microscope, studying the kind of minerals that make up the sand. In fact, one of our graduates from last year, Don Osborne, did his thesis, his honors thesis, and his senior thesis as well with me. And what Don did was to take samples of this particular formation, which we collected from basically Montgomery all the way over to the Flint River area here. So he had samples from across this whole swath. And he was looking at the mineral composition to see if he could tell the differences in them. And as a matter of fact, he could, basically recognizing two different areas from which the sands were derived. Incidentally, one of Dr. Barredo's students has been working on not exactly the same kind of work, but looking at the same kinds of areas.
Mm-hmm.
And he and Don Osborne and Buddy Barrow and I have got a paper represented Southeastern Geological Society of America in about a month or so.
That's great.
So there's all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, with more money, we could buy better tools. There are some hand-carried spectrographs at the other field that give you chemical analysis data. But at the moment, we don't have anything like that.
Yeah. In this segment of our conversation, Bill shares a geological perspective of global warming, and we talk about the enormous scale of geological time. Well, so in looking back to see these changes over, great spans of time in the past, is it possible for you to get some sense of kind of what's happening geologically right now? Or is it, do you have a sense of like what's new with our tectonic plate?
Well, sure. In fact, that actually leads to a very fundamental concept in geology. It's referred to as the principle of uniformitarianism. The idea that there's a uniformity to geological processes through time. It is often sort of popularly said, the present is the key to the past. For example, I tell you that there were buried island deposits here, or estuaries, or whatever. I make those statements by comparing them to what's happening right now. I teach a course in the summer called the Geology of Georgia, and basically it's 4 weekend field trips. We start by going to the coast. We could go down to Jekyll Island. We look at the beach, the coastal forest, the dunes, the tidal flats, mud flats, all that stuff. Go out and wade out in the mud and get dirty. But the whole point is they have a frame of reference, so when they come here into the coastal plain, they can see the similarities.
Yeah.
And then you go back even further. Our third trip is northwest Georgia, up in the so-called Valley and Ridge Province, area south of Chattanooga and that area. You can see the same kind of rocks, but they're much, much older. But they have the same structures. They have the same features that you see here on the coastal plain that you see at the coast.
Yeah.
In other words, the idea is similar features, similar geometries, bespeak similar origins.
Yeah.
Now, the work that I do really has very little to do with tectonics, although it's my favorite subjects. But those subjects are, well, let me start over. The history of most mountain belts, is a history of plate tectonics,
Right.
Plate interactions. The history of the Appalachians features a long history of complex interactions over time. It was not just one event. There were probably 4 or maybe 5 or so in the history, differing from the southern Appalachians, northern Appalachians. It turns out when the final so-called continental collision occurred, it produced the mountains we see today, except much higher. They've been eroding. But it was not just the Appalachians. These, the continents fit together. They broke apart to produce the oceans we have now. But during the late so-called Paleozoic era, there was a single large landmass called Pangea. And the Appalachian Mountains were part of a mountain chain that stretched into what is now Great Britain, on into Norway and Sweden, and then on the other direction on into Texas, and probably all the way into Mexico as well. In other words, it was analogous today to the Alps, the Caucasus, the Himalayas, that long string of mountains that are part of, you know, large areas. Incidentally, that's what Dr. Barano does. Dr. Barano's research is focused on particularly the Southern Appalachians. Indeed, his dissertation was area in Alabama, the Talladega Belt, and he still has a number of projects over there. And that's what he is actually studying, is the details of those tectonic interactions. He goes back further.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to talk to you about taking students on field trips and the kinds of, you know, ways that your discipline lends itself particularly to, you know, outside of the classroom learning. But before we get there, I'm curious about how you developed an interest in rocks to begin with. Were you a kid who always liked playing outside, or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Oh yeah. Of course, when I was, you know, a kid, there was virtually no TV. I actually remember we got our first TV, and we could get one station, and then we got three, but you only see two of them. And the programming wasn't exactly designed for kids, except there was Howdy Doody. I remember Howdy Doody.
Oh yeah.
But the point is, yeah, we you know, Southern kid, we play outside all the time.
And you grew up in North Carolina? Or?
And in the South. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina. Lived there 12 years, and then moved to Greenville, South Carolina. Okay. So I'm a Carolinian.
All right.
But yeah. Although the thing is, I don't know that I really differentiated geology.
Yeah. When did you get interested in geology?
Let me tell you one thing before I get there. There's a family story my mother used to tell that I was never much of an athlete. I'm still not much of an athlete. But apparently one of my teachers, this was in like the 4th grade, at a parent-teacher conference, told my mother that I wasn't playing the sports with everybody else. I was looking down holes. And I realized, oh yeah, that's... But several years ago, I went back, found a bunch of my old black and white photographs I'd taken. I mean, I remember getting my very first camera, very clunky thing to roll the film and so forth. I had not seen the pictures in years, and I found amazed that a lot of the photographs were of rocks and outcrops. We would spend our summers, well, 2 weeks in the summer, up in the area around Asheville. My father and mother both loved to go up there and spend some time just sort of enjoying the woods. Yeah. And on the Blue Ridge Parkway and some of those roads up there, there are some spectacular exposures of rocks that have been bent and twisted and folded. And I've got all these pictures of them. Wow. And so it may be that it does go back a long way. But what really happened was I loved history. In fact, I'm really sort of still in history, just longer history. I went to Furman University. Okay. And when I first got there, I was a history major. And I took my first course in geology. I'd already had biology, everybody took biology. And I didn't want to do chemistry, and so I figured, okay, I'll take geology. And enjoyed it, did well in it. The professor made an announcement to class, said he was taking his mineralogy class to Spruce Pine, North Carolina, and there was room if anybody wanted to come along. Well, I didn't have anything to do that weekend, and just hanging out in dorms, you know. So I said, sure, I'll go. And it was early December. It was really, really cold, like last week cold. You know, beautiful split blue sky, cold as hell. And I loved it. I remember telling the professor, Dr. Snipes, that this is great. He said, well, you should be a geology major. I went, Never looked back.
How about that? Well, that experience of getting to go out in the field and really see what you were talking about. I mean, that's it's unique to your discipline, and I think, well, I guess biologists go out and
They do. I have
get
to say though,
themselves dirty.
Susan, that it's increasingly less common. I mean, one of the things that we do well here is the field experience.
Yeah.
All of our classes get out. Dr. Beardo takes his people out a lot, locally and afield. So Dr. Schwimmer and I have a trip we take every fall for his fossils class and my sedimentary class. We go to Northwest Georgia. We camp. Just love it.
Yeah.
But in our regular classes, we go out locally a lot. Dr. Brown takes his students out locally a lot. So last year, 2 years ago now, we had 4 different students in national internship program. In fact, for a school of our size, to have 4 different people is remarkable. One of them was in the Badlands of South Dakota.
Ooh, I've been there.
He's a paleontology student, and what he was doing was essentially curating some of the fossils they were finding. He told me later that he worked with some students from other schools, well-known schools, good schools, but he had far more field experience than they did. And in fact, one of the reasons he was chosen was because he did have this field background. Like so many sciences, geology is becoming more and more and more detailed. And a lot of that work is done in labs. A lot of work is done with very large black boxes that cost thousands of dollars. And I mean, I don't mean to burn that down. It's important.
Yeah.
But there's less and less ability to actually get outdoors and describe what you see.
Yeah.
Dr. Schwimmer told me a similar thing. He did some work some years ago with a lady who was finishing up her PhD at Harvard, working with Stephen Gould, who's one of those famous paleontologists.
Oh, yeah.
She was like a world expert in this particular kind of fossil, but she couldn't identify other kind of fossils. Her background was very, very, very narrow, very focused. One of the things that we do here, I think we do well, is to be more broadly based. And a lot of that, as you say, does involve being outdoors. I mean, in the end, that's where it is.
Yeah.
We're in a classroom on a blackboard, you're describing what's out there.
Yeah, yeah. Although, you know, what's interesting to me is that, and something I can see as an overlap with other disciplines in the humanities, is the way that, first of all, you have to have some capacity for a historical imagination, right? That you can transport yourself mentally into some moment, you know, far, far away, but also that there's some creativity involved there. I mean, you have to be able to visualize something that, you know, you're projecting onto the thing that you're seeing, and that's not something that comes easily, I think, to everyone.
No, of course, to a certain extent, that's what we teach. You don't get born knowing these things. I had a student several years ago in a geochemistry class I taught, and she was saying, well, I don't understand how you know to do this. And basically I said, well, but that's why you're here. You're in this room because we're teaching you how to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it does take a particular bent of mind. I'm always fascinated, for example, by, in a way, what you're asking me. Why did you get interested in this? You could have been interested in that.
Yeah.
You could have been a historian, or you could have been a philosopher.
Right.
But this is what turned you on.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's probably any good answer. Probably somebody in educational psychology who could tell you all about it.
Yeah.
But what you were saying a minute ago about visualizing the past, actually that's one of the things that really does turn me on. Because the world has changed and changed and changed. Position of continents have changed. they run together and collide, make larger pieces. They break apart in smaller pieces. They move around the world over time. Oceans open, oceans close. And sea level rises and falls. During the Cretaceous, the time I was talking about locally, sea level was very high. Columbus was a coastal city, sort of. But that same sea extended westward and up into the interior of the continent. There was a continuous seaway from here to Alaska. And on the western side of that sea was a growing series of mountains that would become the Rockies. They weren't the Rockies yet. But there was a shallow seaway. In Kansas, you can see chalk deposits forming that same seaway. Several years ago, Dr. Barano and Dr. Brown, Dr. Cruzen, led a field trip that I was allowed to come on. And we went out to Utah and saw some of the same aged rocks out there as there are here. And they have the same fossils. They're the same age. They formed in coastal environments there, although there they were on the edge of a growing mountain belt, whereas that was not the case here. But to sort of sit there or stand there and see these rocks and think, this is not some tale that's being woven by people that know what they're doing. This was a sea. There was really a sea here.
Yeah.
The surface of the earth is constantly changing.
Yeah.
Forces pushing it up, forces pulling it down, erosion is cutting into it. Even if you just go back 10,000 years, a short time, that was just after the end of the last ice age. And this area right here was much colder. It was sort of like a sub-tundra environment. Different kinds of vegetation. Some of the river plains, particularly in the eastern part of the state. Savannah and all those there were different kind of river systems. They're called braided streams, and there were large wind-blown dunes being pushed across these big, broad floodplains. I'm thinking about this because there was this article I actually just got today, a reprint from a fellow at USGS in Washington, on some of those dunes on the Savannah River Plain. Well, that wasn't that long ago. I mean, in terms of Earth history, that was just yesterday. So these changes are continuously taking place, and that's one thing I try to get across to my students. Is that the Earth is profoundly dynamic. You look at the surface of Mars or the Moon, for that matter. You see these craters everywhere. Those craters go back a long time in geological history, but they're still there. On the Earth, there are very few left. There are a few. I mean, there's some that still form. Meteor Crater, Arizona, is a relatively young feature. But there's a 100-mile across big circular lake in Canada called Manicouagan, which is an ancient crater that was basically eroded away, but the substructure was left. You still have that same circular pattern. And there's a place in Germany. There's several. But for the most part, they're gone because our Earth is dynamic. It's active. It's always changing. And which is a good thing to think about in terms of what's happening now. Your question earlier.
It is. I was just thinking, I mean, the really kind of intoxicating thing about taking that big, long-term view is that, you know, it kind of puts into perspective anything that might seem like a major event, like an earthquake from 1934 or something, right? Suddenly you can see that as part of a much bigger scale of events. On the other hand, you know, does it make you more or less alarmed about global warming? I mean, it feels unprecedented in some ways, and then on the other hand, you'd sort of say, yes, well, the Earth is always changing.
And the climate's always changing. We've been on the Earth as a species for a short time, geologically. But by looking at sediments, ocean sediments, looking at ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland, by looking at lake deposits, you get a much longer perspective. And the climate is going up and down all the time. What's different right now is the rate. It's increasing much faster than it has in most cases in the past. But I appreciate the question because I've talked about this with my students also. And that is, yeah, there are things happening now. We might be the cause of them. I suppose most scientists would agree that these changes are due to human activities. But on the other hand, we are, after all, just another species on the Earth. And our activities, in that sense, are part of what the Earth does. There have been changes in the fauna of the Earth, which have had significant climate change in the past. For example, I was also reading just this morning an article in the most recent issue of a technical journal. And this, I don't want to get too far off on the subject here.
No,
but
I'm interested.
But in the Central Pacific, during the so-called Miocene, there was apparently just the right temperature and nutrition conditions for to be very large blooms of planktonic algae, floating algae, particularly ones that secrete silica, and ones that secrete basically calcium carbonate. And the authors of this particular article were suggesting that these very large blooms over tens of thousands of years drew CO2 levels down. CO2 is being used by these organisms to make these things, and that drawdown basically sort of a reverse greenhouse effect. There'd been more CO2. The early Miocene is much warmer. The early Miocene is a lot colder, and they're suggesting that this bloom of algae, basically in the ocean, was a factor in actually global climate change. But yeah, in fact, as you're asking the question, I was sort of smiling because geology does give you a very different perspective. People say we're destroying the Earth. No, we're not. The Earth will be fine. We might die.
We might be destroying ourselves.
Yeah, we may change things to the point where it might be unlivable, but the Earth will be fine.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, there is, or there has been, a profound crisis in the history of life. The so-called Permo-Triassic boundary, the boundary between these two periods of time, was marked by an extinction event that wiped out almost 90% of all species on Earth. I mean, it was probably the biggest crisis in the history of life. It took a while for the Earth to come back.
Yeah.
But it did.
Yeah.
There was this major extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous, the famous KT boundary, which apparently, most people argue, was probably the effect of a meteorite strike, a very large meteorite strike, this buried meteorite crater in Mexico called Chicxulub. You can find debate. There may have been more than one factor. That might have just been, the famous straw that brought the camel's back. The point is that also created a major extinction event. Famously, dinosaurs bought it. But what a lot of people don't know is not just them. Like 70% of all the planktonic species of the ocean died at the same time. Huge numbers of organisms. Now, I don't mean they died like that. Yeah. But over a period of time, they became extinct. Right. Which opened the world up for mammals. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think in terms of, excuse me, public policy, it's incumbent upon us as a species to analyze what's happening, to see if it is in fact going to affect us and our children's generations. And if there's something that we can do, probably ought to do it, at least try. But I'm not worried about the Earth. Yeah. The Earth's going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating to think in terms of the scale that you deal with, because I think of the scale that I am privileged to deal with often in terms of ancient Greece and Rome as being about as old as anybody would be looking at. And now I'm feeling like, well, I mean, that's modern times for you.
Oh, yeah.
In this next segment of our conversation, Bill and I talk about what's new and what's not in college teaching and what really matters to professors. Yeah. Well, let's talk about teaching, because I am curious about, I mean, I have had my spies out hearing about your reputation as someone who is difficult but also really cares about your students' learning and wants to, you know, do whatever you can to help people grasp what they need to know. So I'm curious about, you know, what have you learned about teaching? You know, have you had any changes in what you do or insights into, you know, what works for you that have developed over the years?
I guess that's a yes and no answer.
Yeah.
I mean, I am, like most of us, the product of my background. And when I was a student, there was not much, or if any, technology for teaching. And so, for the most part, my classes involved the professor lecturing, answering questions, and basically that's what I do. I'm a lecturer. I love to tell people about stuff. I love that. But over time, of course, I have picked up some of these new technologies, particularly PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of PowerPoint presentations are basically just text images, and then someone stands there and they read them to you, which is just boring as hell.
Mm-hmm.
But my PowerPoints are almost all illustrations, graphs, figures, photographs. Take a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
One of my hobbies is photography, and I've got some very good pictures I can use. And of course, you can pull these things off the internet too. I'm a very visual learner. I mean, I got to see it.
Right. And that would be a huge advantage, really. I mean, if you think about the effort that a lecturer would have to go to describe something that you could then project a big, beautiful picture of.
But in the end, let me go back to what you said a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'm considered to be hard. I'm not sure I really think I am, really.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, like I said, being a product of my past, I talk, they take notes. And then on the test, I ask them to give me back those notes. I ask questions. My tests are very straightforward. I don't pull any tricks on them. I don't like tricky tests and so forth. And basically just asking them to tell me what I told them. Of course, that involves them writing it. And as you well know, writing skills are in many cases are not as good as they used to be. But that's okay. I can read them so long as they're legible. But I believe that knowing about something is not just on the surface. You have to understand why. And I probably go into more detail in some subjects. Talk about hydrology and water chemistry. And and the book says, well, this is the case. But I feel I need to tell them why this is the case. And so we go into more detail and more depth. But in the end, and I don't want to sound too self-aggrandizing, but I just love to teach. I love to see that in their eyes when they get it. And some people don't. And some people are there because they think they need to be there for their degree or whatever. But most people, I found, if you find something in a subject that's interesting, you can get their attention. And when I explain things, think about plate tectonics, for example, and explain how this does work and how this does involve the deep history of the Earth and these changes. And they come into class and want to talk more about it. and they ask more questions. And that's what I love.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
Kind of lighting the fire.
The other thing is, and the students will not believe this. If any of them hear this, they'll think I'm not telling the truth. But I don't care about their grades. I really don't. They do, and they have to. They absolutely have to. They get the financial aid, or they have to graduate on time and so forth, and it's critical to them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't care their grade at all. What I care about is them sucking this stuff up and learning it.
Yes.
And different people learn it in different ways, and they express themselves in different ways. If they walk out of my class and carry something with them, then I'm happy. Years ago, I had a student, one of the subjects, sedimentary features I talk about in my sedimentology class, has to do with features like river marks on sand. And it turns out it's fascinating. The next time you go out and look, is because there's all different kinds. You have no idea how many different kinds of shapes and forms and geometries and patterns there are in river marks, and how much information that carries with it. In terms of how fast the flow is moving, how deep was it, all of this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm talking about that to introductory geology class. And the next week, this young lady came to me after class. She said, I was out hiking with my boyfriend and I saw ripples. They've always been there.
Yeah.
But you'd have to have someone say, look at that, just look at it.
Right.
And that's what I think I'm doing. It's just saying, look at that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, that difference between, and that students sometimes don't even understand this distinction between wanting to make a good grade and wanting to learn the material.
Yes.
And I've had the experience of a student coming up after class and saying to me something about, what do I have to do I really want to make an A.
Mm.
In the effort to impress upon me how much she cares, and yet I had to say, I don't want to have that conversation with you. Ask me, something that you're excited about that we've been talking about in class today. Ask me about the reading that we just did. This is the questions that you need to be asking me, not what hoops do I want you to jump through, because I'm not interested in the hoops. I'm interested in the subject,
Well, the worst questions I know of is, will this be on the test?
Right, right.
I've told people before, every word I say could be on the test.
If my mouth's moving, you should be writing it down. Well, that makes me think of a different question. About just the students, and whether, the common thought is that they're so different, but I feel like that I hear that conversation is sort of continually, every few years, oh, they're so different. Are they different? You've got a good vantage point. What were students like in the 70s? Are they that much different now?
The truth is, I really don't think so. I think that some of the ways they've been taught are different.
Mm-hmm.
But we still have the same nerve connections. We still have the same thought patterns. EKGs don't distinguish between them now and them past. But I do think that many of them are more, how should I put it, that they're trained to pick up factoids and not as much to put those things together into making an argument. I see this a lot in essay questions I ask, where they think the answer is just to sort of feed back all the various words that are part of the subject without linking them together into an argument, into making a case for something. I have a lot of my classes involve term papers, a lot of them, and yes, I do actually read them. In fact, that's one of the things you probably heard about me, if you heard anything. I go through these papers with literally a fine-tooth comb. I make notes, I write comments, type them out for them. I try to correct their grammar. I probably shouldn't, because that takes a lot of time.
Well,
but when you read a sentence that's just horrible.
Yeah, and I mean, in some respects, it's showing, it's so attentive. I mean, it's showing the student how deeply invested you are in them effectively communicating their ideas, right?
Yeah, see, that's one of the things I think, what we really are doing, all of us on campus. Because I think the hallmark of an educated person is to be able to express themselves. Doesn't matter the subject at all. And when a company hires somebody, particularly if it's in some sort of administrative position, they're not hiring because you knew the definition of this word. They're hiring you because you can put together packages of information that they can sell, one way or the other. And writing is absolutely critical. Incidentally, one of the other things I find some different, although I can't judge this as well, because when I was a kid, most people that I hung around with were like me. We were all readers. I've always loved to read. I'm the kid that literally would put the flashlight and put the blanket over my head. I mean, I did that actually.
Yeah.
And a lot of these kids today, I think, don't read as much.
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate. But then on the other hand, they also have skills that I don't have. I mean, for example, and I don't even trivialize this at all, game playing skills, computer games and so forth. Fascinates me to watch some of these young people and how good they are at this stuff and how much they know about it. And those are valuable skills in the world today.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I don't know anything about gaming. I'm not a gamer, and I have, only observed others doing it. But I can appreciate the way that game theory and that there's something pushing imaginative boundaries there that you're, sort of an interesting new area.
It's fascinating to me how the culture itself is shifting. I mean, when a new video game comes out, or a new version of an old video game, and it's almost whole new worlds with all these various different kind of levels and so forth, and all these various kinds of passageways and all this stuff through it. And you begin to see where, okay, now there are movies being made based on these games. And a lot of the concepts that come out of those games are finding their way into our language.
Yeah.
And it really is, I mean, it really, in that sense, there are big changes.
Yes.
But when a student engages him or herself with the textbook or with your lectures and so forth, I think the same things are going on in their heads as they always were. I don't think children have changed, or kids have changed.
Right, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is going to be, I think, transformative over the next couple of decades. It's hard to imagine that it won't be. Which brings up another line of questioning. I guess this is just two things. I mean, do you have any kind of predictions about what will happen to higher ed over the next couple of decades, and or do you have particular hopes for it? It feels like it's in sort of a transformational moment to me.
I agree. And yes, I'm certain that this is a major transitional period. I mean, it may be that the transition takes a century. I mean, but the nature of higher education is radically changing. There was a column in today's Ledger Inquirer this morning.
I didn't see it.
About whether or not students are getting a value for the money they pay. She was talking about the vast increase in the cost of education. putting it out of reach of a lot of young people. But also, she talked about grade inflation and a lot of courses that maybe don't have as much value. She was pointing out that some schools, I mean, a lot of schools, you know this as well as I, who have reduced the requirements. Many schools, I mean, again, she studied on the, she's writing about an article that just was published of a study of like 50 of the top schools in the country. And some of the schools do not require American government. Some of the schools don't require history. Some of the schools have no requirements at all, apparently. But they do offer courses, this is from her column this morning, Mad Men and Mad Women, which apparently is an analysis, a course-long analysis of that show Mad Men on TV. And I mean, some of that is packaging, I appreciate. But what constitutes higher education is changing. I mean, so much of who and what I am is because of the schools I went to and the professors I knew and the courses I took. And I mean, I've never not been a student. I tell people I started in kindergarten school and I'm still here.
Yeah, yeah.
And the world of academia is what I know. That's the ocean I swim in. But technology has provided us with all kinds of tools so that the aspect of training somebody, I think, could be taken over by things like Khan Academy, where if you want to know how to do this particular kind of differentiation in calculus, there's a Khan Academy lecture for it, and they're good. I mean, they're this is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Khan Academy is wonderful.
Yeah.
I love it, and I recommend it to students. But it's also altering what it is that we do. I know I've always been a proponent, again because from where I came, for sort of a classical liberal arts education. I took courses in music appreciation, art appreciation. I don't know whether it made any difference in how I do my job. I don't know. But I can go home and listen to music and love it. I like all kinds of music. I mean, there's not much I don't like. But one of my favorites when I go home, particularly these days, is opera. I'm a very large fan of Wagner. In fact, I've got all of Wagner's operas on disc.
How about that? You turn it up loud?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's not to get too astray, but
no.
But I can turn it up now because Sandra's not there. And she always talked about me cracking the ceiling.
Oh.
But you got to listen to Wagner loud. You should be happy.
Yeah.
But Verdi, I love Aida.
Oh
And Tosca and
yeah.
I'm not sure I would even have thought about listening to that stuff had not been for this course I took at Furman. I mentioned reading. I'm sure that English courses, literature courses I took, helped me a lot. I remember actually in detail discussions we had in class about A Passage to India.
Oh, sure.
I reread that book about 2 years ago. I sometimes do go back and reread things. But I remember the discussions about what happened in that cave, and what happened to these people. And it's wonderful.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Which means, of course, what I'm really saying is, I think there's more to education than simply learning how to crunch numbers.
Right.
Because so much of that now is easily done by pushing a button on a computer.
Right. Right.
I mentioned earlier this business of sand grain size analysis.
Yeah.
When I was in school, you did the statistics by hand. Because, again, we're going back a long ways here. When I was at Furman, nobody had hand calculators. You did it all by hand. And so for the first number of years I taught sedimentology, I had the students doing these things by hand. I taught them the statistics. But it occurred to me that nobody does it anymore. Like I said earlier, there are published software packages, some freeware, where you just plug your numbers in and it gives you everything. It does the graphing, it does everything. So what do you actually learn? What you learn is what those numbers say, the interpretation of those graphs.
Right.
And that's what I think I'm teaching. But I would hate to have higher education, for example, without philosophy.
Right.
If I had not been a geologist, I might have been a philosopher. I love the stuff.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite classes were philosophy classes at Firm. I took several. Instead, this is an aside, but one of the faculty members in philosophy, Dr. Hibbs, he was probably in his 70s. This was when I was in school, was in from 64 to 68. So it turns out, if you put those numbers together, he was a young man in the 20s. He went to Paris. He actually had photographs of himself, like in a roadside or street side diner with Hemingway. And he always brought his classes to his house once a semester, because he said, you need to understand your professor, about where he lives and what his house looks like. I think you would just want to show those pictures. But his discussions of philosophy were fascinating.
Yeah.
To a course in logic, and that was fascinating.
Oh, with the symbols.
Yeah, and symbolic logic is. And I think all of that put together, that in the science classes, made me me.
Right, right.
And I don't. I mean, it bothers me that in some cases people go through higher education and all they learn is pardon me, my friends, economics or accounting. My friends in economics and accounting are probably getting mad at me, but
kind of thing.
But I think we're supposed to be training the whole person. And allow me one last point on this.
Yeah.
To the extent that you're training people to be whole people and learning how to think, how to read, how to evaluate ideas, how to form concepts, we're also talking about training citizens who vote. We need informed citizens these days, very much. I mean, I don't care what side of the issues you're on, whether it's liberal or conservative or somewhere in the middle, it doesn't matter. You've got to be informed. You've got to know what's going on, and then you use your own mind to decide what you think.
Right, right. In this last segment of our conversation, Bill and I talk about educating a whole person and why we think we do it well at Columbus State. Well, what all of that makes me think about, I mean, you're saying that all of those things shaped you into the person that you've become, has to do with less of, I mean, some of it's content, some of it has to do with being introduced to classical music and now being curious to learn more about opera, but I also think it has something to do with treating your brain kind of like a muscle.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we're going to work it out in certain ways. We're going to make it think of in this certain way and then in this certain way. And,
yes.
You know, I'm sure there's educational theory that has much more sophisticated way of explaining this, but I guess I've recently come around to the point of saying it's true, you will forget a lot of the, you know, concrete information that you're absorbing right now. But it's okay, because the exercise of making your brain learn and absorb and manipulate and synthesize those facts is so good for your brain. Your brain's getting something out of that exercise.
Oh,
you know?
I take reading, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you never read teenage romance or teenage science fiction, if you never read pulp fiction,
Yeah.
then you're not going to read War and Peace. It's this way it's going to happen. Not because you don't have the vocabulary, but you might not, but longer sentences and longer, you know, I mean, it's just, it takes more effort. I think, for example, one of the things I love to do every day, we did this morning, was a crossword puzzle.
Oh yeah, me too.
Crossword puzzles keep you thinking.
Oh yeah.
But when we first did them, yeah, I was amazed people could finish crossword puzzles. But actually, I think the key to working crossword puzzles is just keep at it. Don't give up. Just keep at it.
Yeah. Isn't it something? Sometimes you'll get really frustrated. You put it away, and then just a few hours later, you come back and pick it up, and you go, "Oh, well, of course.
Exactly.
Why hadn't I thought of that?" Yeah. Yeah.
The only part about crossword puzzles that frequently stumps me is people's names that they don't know about. It's Indianapolis race car driver. I don't know.
Right. That's right. That's right. And sometimes there's a particular frame of reference in one puzzle that you just think, oh, come on. Who was this puzzle for? I don't know these references, but.
The one yesterday in the Sunday paper, which is, of course, always the longest.
Oh, yeah.
The key to it was names of people whose first and last name begin with H, like Helen Hayes and Hannah Hopper, and
wow,
there were like 8 of them. And once you get the key, then you can work it out.
Was he one?
No, he wasn't. But there's actually, the more I thought about it, the more I realized a lot of people's names. But
Humbert.
As a great example of not seeing the forest for the trees, you always look at the patterns of crosswords, and there are always some symmetrical ones somewhere or other.
Right.
You get so focused on the words. So I pulled back, and if you have the Sunday paper, go back and look for it, because right in the middle, the black boxes, H.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
How about that? Imagine the cleverness of the puzzler there. Someone wrote that puzzle.
I am constantly amazed by these people.
Did you ever watch that? There's a great documentary, I think it's on Netflix, about the champion crossword people.
I've looked for it.
I'll try to think of the title of it. It may have the word crossword in the title, but it's about those people who rate their speed crossworders, right?
Yeah.
And Will Shortz is on it and talks about what it's like to make up a good puzzle and what makes harder clues and all that kind of stuff. It's great.
I do time myself. I'll write down.
You do?
I'll write down the time I start, when I finish. But like I said, I mean, often my average is probably around 15 to 20 minutes.
Ooh, that's good.
But not the ones that have the race car drivers' names.
Oh, yeah.
I might be on that one for an hour.
Yeah, yeah. I also think of it as a point of professional pride to know the answers to things that have anything whatsoever to do with literary figures, or, it's like, well, I can't not know that one. Come on.
The only trouble is sometimes that gets you in trouble because you know so much about it.
Yeah, that's right.
And they'll give you a clue that could, igneous rock. Well, there's hundreds.
That's right. That's right. Well, I just have one more kind of set of questions for you. Since you've been a part of this university and for such a long time and seen its culture, like the earth, ebb and flow, I was thinking about the fact that, we do sometimes refer to it as the CSU family, the CSU community, more of sort of a very warm sense of our identity as a university. And I'm wondering, I believe in that, and I think it matters. I mean, would you say that a student's educational experience here is in any way affected by the fact that we think of ourselves as a community? Do we have a community, would you say?
I think so.
Yeah?
Very much. In fact, one of our discussions I had with David Lanoux before he left. In fact, it was after he had announced he was leaving. We were just discussing the school and so forth. And he said one of the things that impressed him most, different from any other school he'd ever been in, was how much the faculty cared about the school. That we are a family in many senses. I lament the fact that I don't know everybody now. I mean, the school's gotten so much bigger. When I first came here, it was a lot smaller. And you could know all the faculty, almost all the faculty. Not anymore. And that's unfortunate. Although I also believe, I think it's a better school than most people think it is. There's a popular perception of this jazz is, but this is a good school.
I agree.
This is an excellent school with excellent faculty and excellent facilities, and we're getting better. I think that it is unfortunate that the costs are going up. But I was reading that article this morning in the paper. She said, well, college costs have gone up like 500%. And why is that? Well, the answer is our funding is being cut. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a 40% cut in the money that we get from the state. And that's the bottom line. But in terms of the perception of this place as a community or a family, that's very much the case with our department, our students. And one of the reasons is because we do go out in the field, we go camping. Now, I spend a lot of time with these people around campfires, just talking about whatever. And we discuss religion, and we discuss politics, and we try not to hate each other. And but the students, they all feel free to come by our offices, or just chat in the hallways or whatever. And you learn a lot of things that have to do with the subject you're teaching. I mentioned earlier my professor at Furman, Dr. Snipes. He was the best teacher I ever knew. He was great. But a lot of it is because, which is what I said, I had a chance to get to know him. He was an Army Ranger in World War II and in Korea. He fought in serious fights. But he was not, he didn't talk about it very much. He would talk about it if you asked him. He was so much more than that. He's just a great guy. I think all across our campus. I know one of the things that I like about your department is you also get a chance in discussing literature particularly, and poetry and so forth, to engage students at a level that's not just learning things.
Right.
I know one of our former geology majors had transferred from English. And told me she thought the best teacher she ever had was Jim Owens, which of course I'm sure is true. How could you not like Jim? Same thing with Dan.
Yep.
But I'm pretty sure that's the case everywhere here. I think we do care about. I mean, everybody teaches, probably cares somewhat.
Yeah.
And there are probably some that don't, but probably not the best teachers out there. But as I said a while ago, I think that Columbus State University is a really good place. I think, for example, that President Mescon's campaign to make this a first choice school, this is a very good point. We should be a first choice school. I like the fact that we're developing all these dorm complexes now. I mean, when I first came here, there were no dorms at all. There was a couple of small houses on Clearview Circle for athletes, some athletes, and some music students. Of course, this is long before the downtown campus.
Right.
But I'm a great believer in the idea that part of our college education is not what you learn in classes at all, what you learn because you're living on your own for the first time. You got to get out of the house. I really believe that strongly.
Right.
And if you go broke, well, so you learned something, haven't you?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Well, you know, it's funny. I had a experience with a student just last week that made me realize they pay attention to this my first choice business, which I had never heard students talk about it before. But I went to an event at the river park that was part of our new medieval Renaissance studies events, and we were doing English country dancing.
Cool.
It was mostly music students. It was their convocation, but they had opened it up to other students who wanted to come. And so, you know, there we are, holding hands, dancing, turning, you know, with doing the best we could to follow the caller. And one of the students I was partnered up with, who I had taught as a freshman, said, as sort of a funny way to, you know, enjoy the moment, Columbus State University, where you get to dance with your professors, my first choice. And I thought, that's really sweet, because there we were. It was what we were doing at the moment, and it clearly was fun. Everybody had a good time. We laughed. We were all sort of making fools of ourselves at the same time, and it was really nice to hear.
And that's what I meant earlier. I mean, you can learn things from Khan Academy, but you can't get that.
Right.
There's an article in the New Yorker, probably about 6 months ago, about MOOCs.
Oh,
it's
right.
an interesting article. And the author was very, very even-handed, interviewing faculty members at Harvard and Stanford and all these places, and some of them were in favor of MOOCs, some of them weren't. He's given a good back and forth. But at the end of the article, he related a story. He said one of the professors he was interviewing at a class, he sat in the class, I think it must have been a history class. And toward the end of the class, the professor was running a bit long. One of my famous problems is running too long. But the person who was going to come to the classroom next, the next professor, was sitting in the door, sort of waiting. And a student asked the professor a question. And the professor said, well, that's not a question, but you really should ask him. And so the other professor comes in. And they start talking back and forth with themselves, and so the students are asking questions. And the author of the article in New Yorker basically said, you can't get that online. You just can't.
That's a great anecdote. Yeah. And also a real plug for the kinds of, you know, intercollegial cooperation that we like to do all the time. And
instead, that's a major trend, I suppose, probably most sciences, but certainly in geology. Geology is a subject that is informed by physics and biochemistry and biology, and more these days astronomy. And pulling everything in together. I don't know, I've had too many geological insights for Wagner, although I do think, like you said earlier, it stimulates your mind.
Sure.
But I am eclectic. I mean, what I read, for example. Over the Christmas break, I read the Hunger Games trilogy.
Oh, did you?
Which I actually enjoyed, but then I like that sort of fiction.
Yeah.
But I'm about halfway through now with Doris Kearns Goodman's most recent book on Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh,
it's half. It's called The Bully Pulpit.
Okay,
it's
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And sometimes I will be reading that while there's Bach in the background. I mean, I like being as well-rounded as possible.
Right, right.
Because I think it makes me a better teacher.
Absolutely.
I can bring examples in the class, and I can engage students who are actually maybe history majors or something else, and I can bring some of that information to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a beautiful illustration of what the life of the mind is all about.
Yeah.
And I know we could go on talking about it for a few more hours, but I'm going to release you from your chair. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for asking. I mean, for one thing, we could have had this conversation at the loft, over a beer.
Yeah.
This is what I love to do.
Yeah.
In fact, I've told people one of the reasons I like teaching is because I like to talk to people.
Yeah.
So thank you.
It's great. Well, you're welcome. I'm excited to keep having these conversations with you and other people in the future. So, all right.
Okay.